This is an ABC News special report.
I'm Wade Johnson at ABC headquarters in New York, and we are interrupting regular programming with the latest developments on the situation in the Middle East. Here's what we know so far at this hour. President Trump overnight announcing major combat operations against Iran called Operation Epic Fury. The operation, a joint U.S. and Israeli attack said to be targeting Iranian government and military sites. Iran is reporting civilian casualties, including dozens at an elementary school. U.S. military officials say they are looking into those reports. American officials say the operation could last for days. The IDF now saying U.S. and Israeli forces launched hundreds of strikes, and they say several senior leaders were eliminated. President Trump warning that there could be U.S. casualties as well. A U.S. official tells ABC News that American forces have intercepted multiple Iranian missiles targeting bases and allies in the region. That includes Jordan, Bahrain, Kuwait, UAE, and Qatar. We're monitoring all of this. You can see some of the early videos coming in, smoke rising we've seen in Tehran, the capital of Iran. And overnight, President Trump speaking about the operation. Here's what he had to say.
A short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran. Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, a vicious group of very hard, terrible people. Its menacing activities directly endanger the United States, our troops, our bases overseas, and our allies throughout the world. For 47 years, the Iranian regime has chanted death to America and waged an unending campaign of bloodshed and mass murder, targeting the United States, our troops, and the innocent people in many, many countries. Among the regime's very first acts was to back a violent takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, holding dozens of American hostages for 444 days. In 1983, Iran's proxies carried out the Marine barracks bombing in Beirut that killed 241 American military personnel. In 2000, they knew and were probably involved with the attack on the USS Cole. Many died. Iranian forces killed and maimed hundreds of American service members in Iraq. The regime's proxies have continued to launch countless attacks against American forces stationed in the Middle East in recent years, as well as U.S. naval and commercial vessels and international shipping lanes. It's been mass terror, and we're not going to put up with it any longer. From Lebanon to Yemen and Syria to Iraq, the regime has armed, trained, and funded terrorist militias that have soaked the earth with blood and guts. And it was Iran's proxy, Hamas, that launched the monstrous October 7th attacks on Israel, slaughtering more than 1,000 innocent people, including 46 Americans, while taking 12 of our citizens hostage. It was brutal, something like the world has never seen before. Iran is the world's #1 state sponsor of terror and just recently killed tens of thousands of its own citizens on the street as they protested. It has always been the policy of the United States, in particular, my administration, that this terrorist regime can never have a nuclear weapon. I'll say it again, they can never have a nuclear weapon. That is why in Operation Midnight Hammer last June, we obliterated the regime's nuclear program at Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. After that attack, we warned them never to resume their malicious pursuit of nuclear weapons, and we sought repeatedly to make a deal. We tried. They wanted to do it. They didn't want to do it. Again, they wanted to do it. They didn't want to do it. They didn't know what was happening. They just wanted to practice evil. But Iran refused, just as it has for decades and decades. They've rejected every opportunity to renounce their nuclear ambitions, and we can't take it anymore. Instead, they attempted to rebuild their nuclear program and to continue developing long-range missiles that can now threaten our very good friends and allies in Europe, our troops stationed overseas, and could soon reach the American homeland. Just imagine how emboldened this regime would be if they ever had and actually were armed with nuclear weapons as a means to deliver their message. For these reasons, the United States military is undertaking a massive and ongoing operation to prevent this very wicked, radical dictatorship from threatening America and our core national security interests. We are going to destroy their missiles and raise their missile industry to the ground. It will be totally, again, obliterated. We're going to annihilate their Navy. We're going to ensure that the region's terrorist proxies can no longer destabilize the region or the world and attack our forces and no longer use their IEDs or roadside bombs, as they are sometimes called, to so gravely wound and kill thousands and thousands of people, including many Americans. And we will ensure that Iran does not obtain a nuclear weapon. It's a very simple message. They will never have a nuclear weapon. This regime will soon learn that no one should challenge the strength and might of the United States Armed Forces. I built and rebuilt our military in my first administration, and there is no military on earth even close to its power, strength, or sophistication. My administration has taken every possible step to minimize the risk to U.S. personnel in the region. Even so, and I do not make this statement lightly, the Iranian regime seeks to kill. The lives of courageous American heroes may be lost, and we may have casualties. That often happens in war. But we're doing this not for now. We're doing this for the future, and it is a noble mission. We pray for every service member as they selflessly risk their lives to ensure that Americans and our children will never be threatened by a nuclear-armed Iran. We ask God to protect all of our heroes in harm's way, and we trust that, with his help, the men and women of the armed forces will prevail. We have the greatest in the world, and they will prevail. To the members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, the armed forces, and all of the police, I say tonight that you must lay down your weapons and have complete immunity, or, in the alternative, face certain death. So, lay down your arms. You will be treated fairly with total immunity, or you will face certain death. Finally, to the great, proud people of Iran, I say tonight that the hour of your freedom is at hand. Stay sheltered. Don't leave your home. It's very dangerous outside. Bombs will be dropping everywhere. When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take. This will be probably your only chance for generations. For many years, you have asked for America's help, but you never got it. No president was willing to do what I am willing to do tonight. Now you have a president who is giving you what you want. So let's see how you respond. America is backing you with overwhelming strength and devastating force. Now is the time to seize control of your destiny and to unleash the prosperous and glorious future that is close within your reach. This is the moment for action. Do not let it pass. May God bless the brave men and women of America's armed forces. May God bless the United States of America. May God bless you all. Thank you.
President Trump right there in the early morning hours making the case to justify this military action in Iran, talking about the potential for U.S. casualties as a result of this, calling this a war, also calling on the Iranian people to rise up, saying when we are finished, take over your government, it will be yours to take. The president also talking about the reasons for going into this, calling it an imminent threat, although not presenting any specific evidence. We are getting some other reports from multiple sources who tell ABC News that the attacks also targeted Iran's leadership, including the president and supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei. And these are some of the images that have been coming in, these early morning attacks that we're seeing after the sun came up in Iran, those plumes of smoke. Let's go ahead and bring in our chief foreign correspondent, Ian Pannell, who is now in Tel Aviv. And Ian, I know you've been tracking this with us all morning long. You are now in one of those bomb shelters there as those air sirens have been going off. What's the latest on the ground? What can you tell us?
Yeah, I mean, the air raid siren is barely stopping. I mean, we're getting every few minutes now a new siren. That's why we've decided to come in here. Otherwise, it's just not safe to be outside, and that is the situation for everyone across the country at the moment. We were woken at 8 o'clock in the morning by one of those emergency alerts that you get on your phone. You have a similar system in the US, where you get alerts for weather or if there's a missing child. Similar sounding alerts, but the message was very clear. Israel has launched an attack against Iran. A state of emergency has been put into place in the country. The people were instructed to listen to Home Front Command, which is the body here that tells people when there are alerts, where to take shelter, and keeps them updated on the latest information, and also to warn that they should expect Iranian retaliation in the form of missiles and drones. And that retaliation has been going on all day long. Now, Israel has a very sophisticated air defense system. It's not just the Iron Dome. There's a whole layer upon layer of different systems calculated to intercept different kinds of munitions. Plus, you have the support of the US, which also has some very advanced air defense systems, and those have been put into place in the other countries around the region. The Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, also making a statement which not as long as President Trump's, but pretty much the same kind of sentiment, that Israel couldn't continue to live with what they saw as the threat, the emerging threat from Iran, and they needed to act now before it was too late. It's not a new argument. It's an argument that's been used on previous occasions when we've seen previous military action against Iran, but nothing comes close to what it is we are now witnessing. This is certainly ambitious. What we're talking about here is regime change. When the president urges the Iranian people to rise up, when you go after the very top echelons of Iran's leadership, that's only designed to do one thing, and that is an incredibly ambitious thing to try and do from the air. Remember what the invasion of Iraq was like back in 2003, how difficult, how bloody, how protracted that operation was, and that's with boots on the ground. It's going to be very hard to achieve all of the aims that President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu have set for themselves just by bombing from the air, and I think people should be braced. As the President warned, it's not going to be easy, it's not going to be bloodless. We're getting reports that a girls' school in southern Iran was hit in US-Israeli action. The Pentagon say that they are now reviewing the incident with dozens and dozens of schoolgirls reportedly killed there. So we're already seeing in these early stages the formation of what's likely to be a protracted conflict.
All right, Ian Pannell for us. Please stay safe and stand by for us if you learn anything new. We're also getting more information about the attack itself. ABC News hearing that the strikes involve a mix of U.S. aircraft, Tomahawk, cruise missiles, fires. We know there's been a huge military buildup in the region with 2 aircraft carrier strike groups and hundreds of aircraft, more than 30,000 U.S. troops there, and more were on the way, and we are seeing the results of it right now. I want to bring in Mary Bruce, our chief White House correspondent, because Mary, we know that there's been sort of this buildup throughout the week. We know President Trump was briefed at the White House earlier this week by top military officials, but the signals kept coming that perhaps there could be some kind of limited strike that would help and leverage in these negotiations. That is not what we're seeing here. The president calling this major military operations, Mary.
Yeah, with the president saying that this is a massive and ongoing operation, and he is vowing that it is going to decimate Iran's military. It's going to raise, that's the word he said, raise Iran's nuclear program, and of course now calling for the Iranians to overthrow the government. Now, the president had been stressing in the run-up to this his preference for a diplomatic solution, but obviously tensions had also been escalating, and it's not clear exactly what in the last 24 hours ultimately led the president to make this decision, but it was increasingly clear that his patience with these ongoing nuclear talks was running thin. I mean, the president coming out here yesterday afternoon, speaking to reporters and saying that he was, quote, not happy with how negotiations were going. When it comes to the president's rationale for this huge campaign now, the president, as you noted, says that these are necessary strikes to defend Americans against an imminent threat. But he has not provided any clear evidence of that. And so the real big remaining question here is why now? And the president, we have asked, other reporters have been pressing for weeks, the president and the White House, why additional strikes would be necessary now, especially given the fact that the president has insisted, continues to insist, that U.S. strikes last spring, quote, obliterated its nuclear program. But there is no question that this is a hugely consequential and pivotal moment for this president, who, of course, ran promising not to drag the U.S. into more foreign conflicts. And yet now here he is warning that this could go on for some time and that American lives could be lost.
And Mary, on that same point, we know that President Trump has been disappointed with how the negotiations were going, but it was 9 days ago that he gave an ultimatum and gave Iran 15 days to come to a deal. So now it's 9 days, and yet this wide-scale attack.
Yeah, that 15 days wouldn't have run out until this coming Friday. And I think there was a sense that this administration was going to give these talks a little bit more time. Obviously, there were signs that things were getting more serious. Secretary Rubio had been briefing those critical Hill leaders on the potential of additional strikes. The president clearly growing more frustrated. Also keep in mind that Prime Minister Netanyahu was here at the White House not long ago, meeting with the president, presumably making his case for how these strikes could unfold. So things certainly were pointing towards this direction, but the timing and the scope of this is what is particularly, I think, surprising. I mean, the president certainly has been against these kind of prolonged conflicts. In fact, he said just yesterday that, you know, there is always a risk that this could turn into a lengthy engagement. But we also heard from the vice president, J.D. Vance, who said there is no chance that the U.S. would get into some kind of years-long conflict. Now, it's too soon to say how this will play out, but this is dramatically different from the kinds of more limited, targeted strikes that we saw in Operation Hammer last spring.
Yeah, and as we've heard many times, it's easy to start a war. It's a lot more difficult to end one. So we'll see how this plays out, especially with so many different countries in the region now involved. Let's bring in our chief global affairs anchor, Martha Raddatz, joining us now from Washington. Martha, I know that you've been to Iran many times. The state of play has definitely changed in that country. They've been weakened dramatically, their proxies as well throughout the region. But what do you make of their response right now? Because we are seeing some of these retaliatory strikes against other Arab countries in the Middle East.
Well, those retaliatory strikes were almost immediate, Whit. They clearly knew that President Trump was probably very close to launching some kind of attack on Iran. His rhetoric over the past few weeks, and they have seen what he has done in the past, of course, last summer in June when he launched those strikes as well. But I think the retaliation so far compared to last June is lesser. It is a frightening response. We've got these missiles aimed at U.S. bases and these Arab countries. But last summer in June, they launched about 500 missiles and more than 1,000 drones into Israel. So I would not be surprised if their retaliation increases or lasts for several days themselves. We don't know exactly what they're doing. And of course, the supreme leader and the president there in Iran, Donald Trump said he wants regime change. We don't know the fate of the supreme leader or the president at this point. Iran seems to say they're fine, but we'll have to see about that. Iran has been deeply penetrated over the years by presumably Israel. I have seen on the ground over many years the actions that Israel has taken. Nuclear scientists have been blown up in their cars in these very exact operations, placing explosives on the side of their cars. So they've gone after the nuclear scientists. They've gone after the nuclear program. But despite what Donald Trump says about it being obliterated, there is still enriched uranium, and they do believe they're restarting this. We have seen no evidence of that. Just in the State of the Union, the president said they obliterated the nuclear program last summer. Clearly, he does not believe that is the case now, or wouldn't have taken this action. Also, he was presented with numerous options by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That is the job of the chairman, to present the president with numerous actions. This seems to be the most extreme, looking for regime change. He could have done a limited strike. He could have done a limited strike while they were negotiated, and that is one of the options he had. A limited strike, it will bring the Iranians to the table. They'll know we need business. They'll be more likely to side with us in this. That did not happen. This is clearly the most extreme. Now, those missile launches towards U.S. bases and into those Arab countries, we are told by a U.S. official that in the Navy and in Bahrain, in UAE, in Qatar, that there are no serious injuries to U.S. personnel. But sometimes that takes time to find out. In 2020, when Iran launched missiles into al-Assad, Iraq, in retaliation for the drone strike on Qasem Soleimani, they had concussions there that they didn't know they had, and traumatic brain injuries for really some time. Donald Trump at the time said there were no casualties. There were, but it just took time to find out about those casualties. So that is something we'll have to watch. I happen to be on the ground in Tehran when they launched those strikes. I think they would have done much more in retaliation to the death of Soleimani, but they had shot down accidentally a commercial airliner, and the Iranians, of course, humiliated by that and horrified.
Martha Raddatz for us. Please stand by if you learn anything new. We'll bring you back on. I want to bring in our ABC News contributor, retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General. Actually, you know what? Forgive me. We're going to bring in Colonel Steve Ganyard right now, who is joining us right now. And Steve, I know that you've been following all of this, the military buildup. We talked about the 30,000 plus troops who are either in the region, more on the way. Talk to us about what you're learning about the military assets that were used to carry out these strikes and what we could expect in the days ahead.
Yeah, I think what part of the deception plan here was to have enough tactical aircraft in the region so the U.S. could credibly say they had the means to make a sort of limited strike that we heard about. We heard the president talking about over the past few days. But now that this is going to go on for perhaps at least a week, the U.S. is going to need to bring in heavier firepower. So I would imagine what we're going to see here now is, in addition to the two carriers, in addition to the many tactical aircraft that are on the ground in the region, we will probably see bombers being brought into the base at Diego Garcia in the middle of the Indian Ocean, perhaps to the UK at RAF Fairford, where the US has staged its bombers in the past. So this is going to take time. A lot of those Tomahawk missiles have been launched today. The U.S. Navy is going to need to rearm those ships that launch those missiles. But obviously, the U.S. has phased this into a shoot, look, shoot type of scenario. So maybe another day of strikes, and then they will do assessments. They will see what targets have been hit, what the effects have been, what targets they need to re-hit. What are the Iranians saying? What's the reaction of the street? So it's going to be a phased approach, but I think we'll see more of the heavier firepower B-2s, B-51s, B-1s, and B-2s coming in the next few days that will supplement all this tactical air power that's already in the region.
And Steve, I know you've touched on this, but this is a question a lot of Americans are going to be asking, which is, what is the state of the current Iranian nuclear program, Operation Midnight Hammer, which happened last June? After that, President Trump said that their nuclear operations were totally and completely obliterated. We know there were questions about just how much of an assessment you can do with those after those bunker-busting bombs that go down in the ground. So how much we were actually able to learn after those strikes. What do we really know about the state of their nuclear program now?
Yeah, it's hard to say what actually what the CIA thinks or the DIA thinks, but the sort of civilian open source assessment was that we only put them back about 1 or 2 years. So we had a number of pinprick sort of deep penetrating weapons go into the various sites. They got down into those lower areas where the centrifuges were, but not having the ability to go in and assess how did those bombs work and how much of that was destroyed. Really, it's a bit of a guessing game. So the U.S. just does not have the ability to put people on the ground and go in and look there. We don't have the intelligence assets. So that's the real question. But the thing that we've heard from Mr. Witkoff this week, which was a little bit confusing to some people, and that is his concern about the ability of Iran to build a nuclear weapon in the short term. This concern comes from about 1,000 pounds of highly enriched uranium that have been missing. The IAEA was tracking it before, but when the inspectors were all kicked out, we now really have no idea where that might be. It may be underground at Fordo, but there's no clear evidence that that is the case. That 1,000 pounds weight is enough to theoretically build 10 nuclear weapons. So the Iranians don't even need to reconstitute their current capability, their current enrichment facilities. They have the ability with that amount of highly enriched uranium to begin to think about building a bomb. That's been the real key to what I think has been pushing the president here to make this decision.
Yeah, and as President Trump said today, he was talking about eliminating imminent threats. Unclear exactly what that was, but no doubt that will be part of the question going forward. Steve Ganyard, thanks so much as always. We appreciate it. And congressional leaders, the so-called Gang of Eight, were briefed by the White House Wednesday in the situation in Iran. Secretary Rubio reached out to members also of the Gang of Eight before operations against Iran began today. So let's go ahead and bring one of those members of Congress right now, Republican Congressman Rick Crawford, who is chairman of the House Select Committee on Intelligence. Congressman, thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it. Could you just walk us through when you were notified about this strike and what you were told today?
Well, there was an update given to the Gang of Eight on Wednesday. It wasn't outlining details of the strike, and it wasn't giving a timeline for a strike. So that briefing was separate and apart from the notification. So I received a call yesterday preparing for, that was the notification to be prepared for this strike to come. But the Gang of Eight briefing was separate and apart from that took place earlier in the week.
And Congressman, the scale of the attack that we're seeing right now, is this what you expected, or is this bigger?
I would say this is probably kind of what I expected. I mean, I think, you can, sit back, and the military analysts are going to sit back and look at this and do the play-by-play on it and give their analysis. But without getting into great detail, I mean, this is sort of what I would have anticipated, this level, this scale.
So let me ask you, we're getting these reports that targeting the Iranian leadership was part of this operation. The Ayatollah Khamenei, Iran's president, and President Trump talking about regime change today, asking the people of Iran to rise up, take back their country. Do you agree that regime change is the way to go right now in Iran?
This regime since 1979 has been a regional hegemon and a thorn in our side in more ways than we can count. I mean, I've actually experienced this myself personally, and back in the 80s, going back to the attacks on the Marine barracks in Lebanon, the Samuel B. Roberts in 1988. The Khobar Towers in 1996. This didn't just happen in the last week or two. This is 47 years of precedent that this regime has acted the way that they're acting, not only against American targets, but others in the regime. They've stood up proxies to carry out their bidding in other parts of the world, Hezbollah, Hamas, others. They've funded other terror organizations. This didn't happen in a vacuum. It didn't happen last night. It was, this is the sum total 47 years worth of outrageous conduct on the part of the Iranian regime. And so put that into context with the history of Iran. I mean, 5,000 years of civilization, and the only thing we think about are the last 47. And so I think the Iranian people hunger for freedom and hunger for self-determination, but they need some help, because regime has repressed them for so long that they just are going to need a little bit of help. So I'm encouraged that this is an organic uprising, and I would absolutely encourage him, as the president has, to use this opportunity.
But Congressman, forgive me.
Just about.
Forgive me, as you were talking about, the oppressed people of Iran, you're a Republican, you're a supporter of President Donald Trump, and you know that he ran on a campaign of ending forever wars, not starting them, and that was very much a promise that many of his supporters adhered to, and that they expected a promise that would be kept. But here we are in this situation, and we don't know what's going to play out in the days ahead. But are you worried that regime change, toppling the top leadership of Iran, could in fact lead to an extended conflict throughout the region, pulling in American troops? The president even warning us of potential American casualties.
Well, I'm not sure you understood what I was just explaining. This war didn't start last night. This war started in 1979. And the Iranians started it.
No, I understand that, but again, it's President Trump who made the call as the commander-in-chief to carry out these strikes.
It was President Trump who made the decision to end this forever war. When you talk about a forever war, 47 years, does that constitute a forever war? A lot of people would say yes. It's longer than our engagement in Afghanistan. It was longer than our engagement in Vietnam. We've been engaged with the Iranians since 1979. They've killed hundreds of Americans and countless allies. They've killed, most recently, as many as 30,000 of their own people. That's genocide by any measure. And not to mention the fact that their obsession with becoming a nuclear power, which not only gives them the ability to be a regional hegemon, but a global hegemon.
But Congressman, forgive me again, I don't think nobody disputes the threat from Iran. I mean, this is something that, administration after administration, Democrats, Republicans, all worried about this. Are you comfortable, though, if it requires American boots on the ground or American casualties to facilitate this regime change? Is that something you're comfortable with?
We have never had boots on the ground in the 47 years that we have been in this state with Iran. However, Iranians have facilitated boots on the ground in action against the United States. Am I comfortable with boots on the ground in Iran? I don't think that'll be necessary. I think what we're going to see over the next few days is an organic change that was necessary, and 47 years of history indicates it. So there are other issues beyond just regime change. There is the ballistic missile capability, short, medium, long-range missiles that are aimed at the United States and the region and our allies. And, of course, their nuclear goals, which have been clearly stated that they would not yield on. And so President Trump engaged in an earnest diplomatic effort to try to come to some resolution. The Iranians, in typical fashion, this regime has decided, nope, they're not going to take a diplomatic route, and this is a consequence of it. This is the first time a president, outside of President Reagan, because President Reagan almost demolished their Navy in 1988 in response to their attack on the Samuel B. Morris. He was the last president that had the fortitude to take on the Iranians in any measurable way. So I'm comfortable that this had to happen.
Congressman Crawford, we appreciate your time and your perspective. Thank you very much.
You bet.
Let's go ahead and bring in ABC's senior political correspondent, Rachel Scott, here in New York, tracking all of this as well. Rachel, I know that you've been in touch with the White House, the Trump administration. What more are you learning about how they are monitoring all of this and perhaps what we could see in the coming hours and days?
Well, we are hearing more right now from the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt. She says that the president continues to monitor the situation from his Mar-a-Lago estate down in Florida. She also says that he did speak with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on the phone. She also confirmed a little bit of what you heard there from Congressman Crawford, saying that Secretary Rubio called all members of the Gang of Eight, again, that's the top Democrats and Republicans in Congress, to let them know that the administration was in fact moving forward with this operation. And then she continues to insist that the president will monitor this throughout the day. Again, right now, we are not expecting to see the president as he's down in Mar-a-Lago. Of course, we will notify everyone if that changes. But I think it was really interesting there what Crawford was saying when it comes to the questions that you were asking him on whether or not Republicans are going to be comfortable with what the president said, this possibility that American lives can be lost. We know from my sources that this played out just over this past week in two separate briefings where the Secretary of State Marco Rubio did brief members of Congress behind closed doors in that classified briefing. Multiple sources tell me that at that point, Rubio told lawmakers that the president had not yet made a decision. And one of the big open-ended questions was whether or not this was going to be a joint military operation with Israel. Then I am told yesterday that is when Secretary Rubio started to make the calls. We are told that he did reach 7 out of the 8 top congressional leaders. But again, just because these congressional leaders got a heads up, that does not necessarily mean that they approve of this operation. In fact, we are hearing from a growing number of Democrats this morning who are insisting that President Trump and the Trump administration need to get congressional approval before they move forward with a widespread military operation like this. Right now, House Democrats are trying to organize a call for this weekend to figure out how they're going to move forward. But we are already hearing from Democrats who are demanding that a bill be put on the floor in both the House and the Senate, a war powers resolution to essentially serve as a check to President Trump in military action in Iran.
Rachel Scott for us. Yeah, and as you've noted, too, it's also some Republicans who've expressed some strong frustration and condemnation for what has happened here. We're tracking all of it. Rachel, thank you. And let's bring in our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas. Pierre, it's good to have you because obviously when something like this happens, there's also what about the domestic threat here at home and what are not only Iran's capabilities for how they could potentially harm Americans, but of course the fear of a lone wolf, somebody acting out inspired by what's happened in the Middle East.
Well, we're in uncharted territory here because if it's true that the Iranian leadership and also not only the military is being affected and impacted by this, their need or desire to have restraint may be now thrown out the window. We have information that the FBI director has ordered his counterterrorism and counterintelligence operatives and agents in the United States to be at an elevated alert. We've been talking to sources throughout the morning, and we also expect to see stepped up security in some large cities, New York City, for example, perhaps Los Angeles. DC police here say they're monitoring the situation and may expand resources as needed. So what all this means is that people are aware that Iran has shown some capabilities or desire to execute operations in the United States. They've attempted to assassinate political figures here, dissidents here. There was even a plot targeting President Trump that they were engaged in. So there's real concern about those things. Also, the more imminent threat people have talked about is the notion of cyber attacks. Iran trying to target United States infrastructure. And as you mentioned, Whit, lone wolves, people acting out in response to all the devastation and the tensions that they see overseas, that's a real potential here as well.
Yeah, no doubt a time of heightened alert. Pierre Thomas for us, thank you. Let's go to ABC's Marcus Moore now, who's in Doha, Qatar. And Marcus, where you are, that's one of the countries that has been dealing with these retaliatory strikes. We were on the air earlier this morning, and you were hearing those sirens and what sounded like intercepting missiles, right, with incoming fire from Iran.
Yeah, that's right, Whit. And this was something that went on for quite a while, well into the night here in Doha. The sounds of these loud booms echoing across the city here, giving you a sense of really how volatile the situation is and how the entire region is impacted. As I talk to you now, we are learning about reports of a drone that has struck the airport in Kuwait. I think we have some pictures from that scene where, according to a spokesperson with the civil aviation ministry there, that there have been a number of injuries among workers at the airport and that there was some damage, some partial damage to a terminal there. We understand from officials in Kuwait that the situation is now under control, but Whit, that is just another country that has been in the midst of the retaliation, and many people worry that this could spiral out of control.
And major U.S. military assets in Qatar and all throughout the region too. We've seen some half dozen countries that have faced some retaliatory strikes. Marcus Morforce, thank you. Please stand by. Let's go ahead and check back in with ABC's chief foreign correspondent, Ian Pannell, joining us from Tel Aviv. And Ian, I know you're still in that air raid shelter there. But I also just want to ask you about Iran, because I know you've covered this region for such a long time. This is a country that really doesn't have that many friends anymore. I mean, the Assad regime in Syria was one of their big allies. Their proxy groups in Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, all weakened in recent months and years. But it raises the question of how they will respond if their backs are against the wall.
Yes, if they think it's an existential crisis, and when you start talking about regime change, that's exactly what it is for Iran. I think that partly explains these kind of large-scale retaliatory strikes that we're seeing across the Gulf now. So many countries that Marcus was referring to there, which are US allies, also home to US troops and military bases. I think for the Iranians, this is fight or die moment. I think the regime knows its back is totally against the wall, and because the Iranian leadership is being targeted. You're right, it doesn't have many friends left in the region. If you go back to before October the 7th, 2023, we used to talk about the Shia crescents. These are countries with majority Shia Muslims who were supportive of or allied to Iran. And the crescent essentially ran from Iran through Iraq, through Syria, into Lebanon. Well, in Lebanon, you've had Hezbollah, which has been significantly weakened. Interestingly, they've released a statement about the attacks on Iran, which, while condemning what the US has done, doesn't seem to indicate that they're ready to come out and start attacking Israel in support, which has been one of the fears here. In Syria, you have Bashar al-Assad, who's been removed from power. You now have a new government that is friendly to the United States. In Iraq, you still have these popular mobilization units. These are militias, which many of whom are backed by Iran. They almost act as a paramilitary force, independent of the government. They have said an attack on Iran would lead to retaliation against US forces in the region, and we've seen those groups do that before. So that will be one particular danger to look out for. But otherwise, you know, the strength of this resistance movement that existed throughout this region has been substantially weakened. But I also want to remind everyone, we're in the holy month of Ramadan, and going after Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, probably the second most important figure in Shia Islam, will have a huge impact on many, many people across this region. So while people may not necessarily be supportive of the regime of Iran and what it does, from a religious perspective, he is a figure that is revered, that is respected, and if he has been killed, it will have an impact across this region. And many people, Shia and Sunni Muslims, will be highly uneasy, to say the least, about a military operation taking place during Ramadan. So while the US tries to win friends in the region, it's also going to run up against opposition, certainly from large parts of the Middle East.
All right, Ian Pannell for us, thank you. We're just now getting a statement from a senior Israeli official to ABC News. I'm going to read part of this for you, saying 2 days after suffering the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust, Prime Minister Netanyahu told the people of Israel that we need patience, but we will change the map of the Middle East. That is what we did by hitting our enemies on 7 fronts in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and he goes on there. But he also says today President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu began to change the world. I want to go back to our Chief Global Affairs anchor, Martha Raddatz, to just get your take on that, because it's significant that Israeli officials are talking about changing the map, changing the world, as President Trump and the administration are talking about regime change. What does this all mean for the Middle East and U.S. involvement in the days ahead? Well,
I certainly think one thing that everybody has to look at, and in many ways, President Trump wants to do the same thing. They want regime change. That would change the Middle East. That would change the world. The problem is we don't know who would take over. Benjamin Netanyahu also said this bombing campaign will go on until the terrorist threat is eliminated. President Trump has said he wants the nuclear weapons program killed completely. He wants to annihilate the Navy, and he wants the regime change. Now, I think one of the things that we're really watching closely is whether or not the Ayatollah was killed and the president of Iran were killed. The Israelis have exquisite intelligence. They likely knew exactly where the Ayatollah was and where the president was. We know that their compounds in the area were bombed. We have seen imagery from that. The Airbus imagery that the New York Times was able to get showed the Ayatollah's compound with lots of rubble inside of that. Normally, I think he would not be there overnight. They are probably moving around, given the threat. But because this came in the daytime, and it has really never happened before that you have a daytime strike like that, it is possible. But the big question is what is next. You can see that compound there and the smoke rising from there, and that is a big hole in that compound. So if he was even nearby, it's possible he was injured. The Iranians, of course, say that's not true. We'll have to wait and see about that. Are they trying to wipe out the senior leadership? All of this would change the map of the Middle East, depending on what happens next, depending on the success of this. You can't just say to a population, lay down your arms. We've seen thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of protesters hitting the street who want change, those opposition leaders. But I have been there enough to know there are millions and millions of hardliners in that country that do not want change. And will there be clashes between those two factions? That is also something to watch. But I know that the Israelis have had great success with their intelligence in the past. I mentioned earlier that I have been there when the Iranians are showing the cars that got blown up by the Israelis of nuclear scientists. Those cars, they put explosive on the very side of those cars. This was a display they had of the cars. You can see that the cars themselves are not that damaged, and yet they were able to kill numerous nuclear scientists. We also saw in 2024, after the October 7th attack, that the Israelis managed to kill a Hamas leader. And that Hamas leader was staying in a guest house in Tehran, and they had planted explosives months before. The Israelis, they waited till he got there. They sent in a tiny drone to make sure it was the Hamas leader. And once they did that, they remotely controlled a bomb and killed him. So those are the kinds of things the Israelis have been able to do over the years. Whether they were successful in trying to target and take out the regime, we'll have to see. But that is key to what happens here, key to how this ends.
And Martha, just to emphasize the significance of all of this, too, you talked about the Israelis, but also the Americans. I mean, Nicolas Maduro, the leader of Venezuela, is just over the river in Brooklyn right now in jail. Taken out, extracted by the U.S. military. Just the shift in strategy to the significance of if we actually targeted and took out the Ayatollah and president of Iran, the ramifications and the implications of what this really could mean.
This was, first of all, let's go back to Venezuela for a second. That was an extraordinary mission, and for President Trump, a very successful mission. But there were about 100 people killed in order to go in and get Maduro. This one is far riskier. Certainly our forces took great risk in that Venezuela operation. We saw at the State of the Union that very courageous pilot who was shot and still managed to get his helicopter in and out of there. But this mission, given the fact that Iran has thousands and thousands of missiles and that their military is far, far, far more powerful and what the Iranians have than the Venezuelans. So these are very different. But you have seen President Trump use the military. You saw last summer, of course, going after the nuclear program, Venezuela. This is different. This is very different. We have to see what the end game is.
Yeah, we've heard Prime Minister Netanyahu talk about peace through strength, especially when he's with President Trump. They're showing their strength here. The question is, can peace come and how quickly after what we've seen today? Martha Raddatz for us. We appreciate it. Let's bring in retired Lieutenant General Doug Lute, former U.S. ambassador to NATO. And Doug, if you could just give us a broader perspective of what is the mission here? We've targeted the United States and Israel targeting the leadership of Iran. We've seen that. Initially, there were reports of what we could see as a limited strike. That's definitely not the case here. So what do you think the broader mission is, and what can we expect?
Well, I think we have actually more clarity today than we had yesterday in terms of the objectives of this military operation. And these are maximalist objectives. We are all in. As the president outlined in his remarks, this is about regime change, but this is about decimating or eliminating Iran's military capabilities, both its missile programs, its Navy, he mentioned, and it's essentially a call for the surrender of the security forces that provide the internal security for Iran. So this is an all-in set of objectives. So that's much more clear. What's less clear is have we actually assembled the resources, the means required to accomplish those objectives? It's clear that yesterday we had a blend of military capabilities and diplomatic talks underway. Well, now we've set aside diplomacy, and we're all in on a military air campaign to achieve maximalist objectives. I don't know of a single historical case where we've pulled off regime change successfully from the air alone.
And Doug, if I can just follow up on that too, and I'm going back to Venezuela only because that was a recent military operation that we've seen, and there were lots of questions after Maduro was removed about regime change and who takes over and American boots on the ground, and essentially we just left. You know, we took him out and we left the rest of the regime in place, and then they're coordinating, obviously, in terms of like the economic and the energy piece of it. But is that something that we could see here, where even if the leadership is taken out, the leadership is toppled, that we could just walk away and leave it up to the people of Iran?
Well, look, Iran's power structure is not singularly resting on the Ayatollah. So a decapitation campaign, even a series of high-end attacks, precision attacks, as Martha Raddatz laid out, on the political, religious, and military leadership of Iran won't topple the regime. This is a deeply embedded security structure, both on the religious side, but also down into the IRGC. So I don't see a decapitation campaign being successful here. And by comparison, the raid into Caracas to seize Maduro was a single tactical event, very successful, but a single event over a number of hours to capture one man and his wife and evict them, to extract them from the capital. The Maduro regime, by and large, remains in place in Caracas. So this is a very different set of circumstances.
Once again, Doug Lute, we appreciate your time. Thank you for speaking with us today. Let's go ahead and bring in retired General Robert Abrams, retired four-star general, U.S. Army, former commander of U.S. forces in Korea. And if you could first just tell us kind of like, the military here provided lots of resources to forgive me here, that's something else. Are we still going to Abrams? Okay, sorry about that. Some developments here. First, just your reaction to what you're seeing and these strikes and how they were carried out.
Yeah, hey, Whit, thanks. I think we just got to step back and understand what was really happening here. For about 3 weeks now, we've deployed about 50% of the entire U.S. deployable combat aircraft to the region. That was a clear, unambiguous signal. There's 2 carrier strike groups and all the supporting aircraft, and that's on top of the about 30,000 U.S. troops we already have there full-time on a rotational basis, protected, very well protected by our Patriot and THAAD air defense systems. But I think that what everybody else also has to understand is we have not deployed a large ground force for any land-based offensive operations. And I agree with Lieutenant General Retired Lute's comments, right? That there are limits. We've got the best air power in the world. We've got the best Navy in the world, but there are limits to air power. And regime change, in the case of Venezuela, very surgical operation. But Venezuela is relatively small comparatively. The capital's close to the water. It enabled us to be able to use special forces, rotary wing helicopters to be able to get in and out. This is Iran. Iran is the size of Alaska. The geography in itself is daunting. So the idea that we're going to be able to do all of this just with air power, it's probably unreasonable to expect that to happen unless there is strong cooperation on the ground with local forces, these populist movements. But we've not seen any evidence that there is some sort of coordination between the U.S. and those people. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, forgive me, General Abrams. I just wanted to ask you, because we've been talking about the ripple effect around the world and Iran's allies and how they've been weakened in recent months, given the previous conflicts and Operation Midnight Hammer that we saw in June. And I just wonder, what do you see in terms of how other countries could be reacting, including North Korea?
Yeah, well, I've got that written right here on my card, Whit. The Iranians, they had been ostracized by the world except for 3 countries: Russia, China, and North Korea. I believe China and Russia have already issued statements condemning the U.S. and the Israelis' actions. I have not seen a statement yet from North Korea. But statements only go so far, Whit, right? One of the biggest differences between us and everyone else is our allies and partners, when we ask them to join us for operations, they actually step up and put their people in support. In this case, we're just getting rhetoric.
General Abrams, once again, thank you for your time. We truly appreciate it and your expertise. We do want to go back to ABC's chief foreign correspondent, Ian Pannell. He is in that air raid shelter in Tel Aviv. Ian, I understand you're getting more information about some of the retaliation from Iran.
Yeah, and I think it's quite instructive, Whit, since you've been on air. I've counted 4 air raid sirens that we've had here. In other words, every time you try and go out, there's another alert, there's another siren, and everyone has to come back in. And that's pretty much been the situation throughout the day here in Israel, but also in Gulf ally nations. So from Kuwait to Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, in Doha, Al Udeid Air Base is the largest U.S. base in the region there. The UAE also attacked multiple times with short-range missiles and also drones. Jordan also reporting multiple explosions. In other words, pretty much every nation throughout the Gulf, apart from Oman, which was acting as a mediator in these talks, has received some kind of retaliatory attack. And I think the question now is, most of them have been intercepted. You've always got the danger of debris coming down. Drones clearly much harder to try and intercept successfully. The Iranian drones in particular, the Shahed model drones, are the ones that Russia's been using to such devastating effect inside Ukraine throughout the war there. So how much has Iran's capability to fire these projectiles being degraded? And I think you've heard some of your military analysts talk about this, that battle damage assessment is going to be absolutely critical. That's what we need to work out next. But intercepting drones is very hard. Intercepting missiles easier, but it depends how many there are. Even during the 12-day war last June, towards the end of it, Israel was getting to a stage where it was starting to run perilously low on interceptors. It's a very expensive business, it's very time-consuming, and it uses up resources. But I think it's reasonable to expect that Iran, now it's got its back against the wall, will continue to hit all of these countries, including here in Israel.
Yeah, perhaps this is just the beginning, so we'll be watching it very closely. Ian, thanks again. Let's bring in ABC's chief investigative correspondent, Aaron Katersky. He's been tracking the possible response here at home. And Aaron, also local law enforcement agencies on high alert now.
They are, Whit, especially in places with Jewish, Israeli, and Iranian populations, places like New York City, Los Angeles, Washington. What they're doing now, and I'm just off with a senior law enforcement official, is target hardening. That was the way it was described. They are sending additional patrols and personnel to synagogues and mosques, to cultural institutions and diplomatic centers, just to be a presence to deter any possible attacks. There is no known particular or credible threat to any of these places. This is merely an abundance of caution, knowing full well that what's happening in Iran and the strike may serve to inspire some kind of an attack here at home. So they are on alert in a lot of American cities right now, Whit.
Another thing to watch in all of this, Aaron Katursky, thanks again. Once again, our breaking news right here, the U.S. in a joint operation with Israel, launching what President Trump called major military operations in Iran, even targeting the leadership of Iran, the president, the Ayatollah Khamenei. Some of these images coming in, you can see some of the burning buildings, the smoke billowing. We've seen this across the region, not just in Iran, a lot out of Iran's capital, Tehran, but also some of the neighboring countries where Iran has fired retaliatory strikes. We've heard about incoming missile and drone strikes to U.S. military assets in the region, many of them shot down. But here we're seeing more of these images here. We have heard about some casualties and some injuries, especially within Iran. So all of this we're going to be monitoring. Stay with ABC News Live and abcnews.com throughout the day for continuous updates. We'll have a full wrap-up tonight on World News Tonight. For now, I'm Whit Johnson in New York. Have a good day.